Mr. Moloto, thank you very much for your time this Saturday afternoon. Understandably, British American Tobacco is not pleased with the ban of tobacco sales. But tell us a little bit more about those unintended consequences you speak of.
Thank you very much, Henry, for having us today. There are three mainly unintended consequences that we foresee on this one. The first, as you clearly stated, that we strongly support government initiatives during the lockdown, which is intended to limit the movement of people so that you don't get the spread of the virus and you are able to protect the citizens of this country. That is the first instance. The second one relates to the consumers themselves, the smokers that are supposed to be restricted in terms of their movement. Our understanding of the initial regulations that came out was that it's not intended to restrict the movement of goods, but that of people, and people will continue to access basic services or basic goods. And that's where the contention comes in, that what exactly are essential goods? Because right now, 11 million smokers have been left stranded, and they'll be forced to actually move from shop to shop, away and even further away from their homes, where the restriction of movement requirement actually becomes a moot point. That is the first concern that we have. So you're not succeeding in the first instance in terms of the regulations pertaining to the lockdown. The second one relates to the illicit trade. We are consciously aware right now that over the past few days there have been reports in the media where cigarettes are not supposed to be sold, but actually they are. So therefore you are giving rise to an explosion of the illicit trade. And it's illicit for the simple reason that probably those people that are selling are not actually contributing anything to the fiscus. That money is not going to flow to the fiscus. Already there's a huge gap in terms of what SARS collected for the past financial year in terms of excise collection specifically. The third one will therefore relate to government having made such huge strides in terms of being able to curb illicit trade. What you are doing now is that you are going to affect the ability of government to collect revenue, which is something that we're going to be needing very urgently when we come out of this current crisis. So these are the three concerns that we have. That they are all not necessarily British American Tobacco focused, but they are much broader in terms of the consumer, ourselves as a business, as well as government in terms of the fiscus.
Mr. Moloto, I know it's much broader than just British American Tobacco, as you have already said there as well. But can you quantify for us that gap, that proportion that will not be contributed to the fiscus due to the ban on cigarette sales?
So speaking specifically for ourselves, last year alone, if I could just give you the numbers, BAT contributed 13 billion in terms of taxes, and just 10 of that just went to excise. So that is just for cigarette tax. And that means on average you are losing at least around 800 million a month that government won't be collecting. If we're not selling a cigarette, a single cigarette, that is money that's not going to flow to the fiscus. So that is just the quantum of what we're talking about. I'm not even going to venture into the entire value chain, because if you look at value chain, farmers are grounded now, and those are the most vulnerable. So the tobacco farmers now are not able actually to sell through, which is money that is desperately needed by those rural communities that are part of our value chain. So if you stretch it, value chain was that is a significant hit that the guys are taking, and considering that we ourselves have shut down operations in compliance with the regulations.
I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here. All South Africans have been asked to exercise discipline in terms of their personal habits, not only in terms of movement, but also in terms of consumption of alcohol, and necessarily also in terms of consumption of cigarettes. The relaxing of those discipline measures, specifically pertaining to cigarettes, how do you think that would affect South Africans' view of the other rules that they're expected to adhere to?
Exactly, Henley. If we go back and to the question that you started with in terms of unintended consequences, we know exactly what it is that government is trying to achieve, and we're behind fully 100% around that initiative. But the question is that, are the restrictions very practical? And are they enforceable? Because are we expecting that our law enforcement authorities are going to be chasing around everybody that is smoking or buying a single cigarette around the street corner? And that is exactly the concern that we have. But I also must hasten to add that the other concern that we have is already the confusion around whether cigarettes are prohibited or not, except for the pronouncements of different ministers. But it's not expressly stated in the three versions of the regulations that have been issued to date. In all of those, for example, alcohol has been expressly prohibited, but there's no express a view one way or the other in terms of whether cigarettes actually are an essential good. And this is what we're saying to government. We're calling for a practical approach, an implementable approach to say that you already have a problem of illicit that existed pre the lockdown, and now you're only creating further incentive for it to explode. Even before the lockdown, government struggled to enforce against illicit trade. Now it's going to be even further worsened by the fact that there are so many areas that government has to enforce to make sure that people comply with the lockdown. So that is all. I apologize.
I'm going to interrupt you there. We have run out of time. We do know that the government will look to clarify those regulations for us, and we're hoping to get more information from them on the ban of cigarettes, especially as how it affects pronouncements made in the Western Cape. We'll bring you that information and clarification as and when we get it from the President.